I had a reaction to the demo of The Last of Us Part 2 at E3 this year that didn't really surprise me, but is certainly telling. If you haven't seen it, I recommend giving it a watch, because Naughty Dog took a really brilliant approach, choosing to contrast the vulnerability of the player character, Ellie, during an intimate exchange, with her brutal, unrestrained violence during her apparent crusade to kill a bunch of dudes in the woods. This demo impressed me for a lot of reasons, one of which being the commitment to that contrast. The intimate moment takes place in a bright, well-lit, crowded area, whereas the atmosphere where she goes on her murder spree is dark, quiet, and visibly cold. The animation is absolutely beautiful and impossibly seamless, so much so that I doubt the final product will look anything like this, but hey, it's a goal they're striving for, not a promise. But the telling reaction I was talking about is that I found myself a lot more interested by the intimate cutscene than by the far more tense and exciting gameplay sequence, because I'm not looking forward to The Last of Us Part 2 for its gameplay. That's just a possible side benefit. What really has my attention is the story, which is exclusively the doing of the original. Released way back in 2013, god I feel old, The Last of Us tells a gripping, immersive tale. It's a long, wearying journey across a post-apocalyptic, broken, and derelict United States by a grizzled smuggler who lost his daughter long ago, and a little girl, immune to the infection that's taking everyone, and desperate for a relationship that won't suddenly and tragically end. As these characters explore empty streets, quarantine zones, and old, crumbling architecture, we explore their minds, learning about their individual psychologies and finding as little happiness and optimism as they do supplies. What few sparks of hope there are come almost exclusively from Ellie's youthful naivete and curiosity, and the relationship that her and Joel form. It's expressed with extremely subtle dialogue and performance capture, but the gradual acceptance and trust that turns to dependence and then to straight up familial love is clearly there. It provides just enough light for the two of them to make it through the game's dark, clicker-infested tunnels and run-down cities full of murderous bandits. At least, that's what I assume, but when it actually comes to the gameplay, that relationship gets put on pause for the most part. I mean, there are some clever things that they do. Joel gradually growing to trust Ellie results in him rewarding her with a pistol that she can use in combat, which aids the player, and they do talk to each other during scripted action sequences and just walking around and such, but for the most part, the stuff you actually play, such as scavenging for supplies, sneaking around, choking people out, and popping up from behind conveniently placed tables to miss another headshot, is devoid of story. Looking at the narrative, you could say that they make it through nightmare after nightmare because of each other, but looking at the gameplay, it's pretty clear that they make it through because Joel, in the hands of the player, is a strangely talented killing machine. And when the player takes control of Ellie a little ways in and she starts mowing down just as many people as Joel does, the story and gameplay couldn't feel any more divorced. And that would be fine. Other games let story take a backseat to focus on making the actual level design and moment-to-moment player actions engaging and fun. But those are games where the gameplay is the point. Last of Us is practically a story game, and since the story so far outpaces the gameplay in terms of quality, the gameplay ends up being a distraction from what the player is actually interested in, rather than going together like peanut butter and jelly. You just fight your way from one story moment to the next, trying to enjoy the shooting gallery or slogging through extremely boring environmental puzzles until that cutscene you've been waiting for finally plays. You set down your controller and watch, leaning forward, hands on your knees as the situation develops. Oh no. Oh no, oh no, Jesus Christ, this is so intense. Oh no, no, don't do it, no! And now we're back to gameplay. Grab that controller, time to slowly walk through this forest, jump down some ledges, and hey Ellie, found another one of them comics. The Last of Us's gameplay isn't bad per se, but neither is Call of Duty, so that doesn't mean much. It's just not super unique, nor does it really push the envelope with its unique mechanics or usage of classic ones. All it's got is its mildly satisfying shooting, cinematic style, and realistic seamless animation, which is good and all, but can I just ask, what's the point? Well, the point is the story, but if the gameplay has so little to do with how the story is told and everything is so cinematic anyway, why is this even a game? It's okay for a game's writing to overpower its gameplay, we call those story games, and a few of them are some of my favorite stories on the planet, and it's equally okay for a designer to not let story interfere with the game's mechanics and level design in order to place a focus on them. But Last of Us is an awkward mix of both approaches, and there are those of you out there who will say that this is what it takes to tell a compelling story in a AAA shooter, but to that I say, why don't we have a look at Bungie's Halo games for a minute? minute. To me, the writing in Halo 1, 2, 3, ODST, and Reach is the almost perfect example of how to write for the kind of game that focuses on gameplay above all else. Of course, the desperate war story that the Master Chief stomps effortlessly through while blasting aliens is nowhere near on the same level as Last of Us's endless depth and meaning, but do not mistake a minimalist story for an ineffective one. The truth is, telling a Last of Us style tale of high art requires so much time and player attention focusing on story that if you were to try the same thing with Halo, you'd invariably end up distracting from and inhibiting its satisfying, thoroughly captivating action gameplay and perfectly paced, memorable, unparalleled level design. Sorry, got a little distracted there for a minute. What was I saying? Oh right, so Halo's story isn't meant to stand on its own. It doesn't have to, because as I was just explaining, the gameplay is perfection. Instead, Halo's story is merely context for the gameplay. Its presence is critical to immersion, selling the idea that you really are a part of this war and really are in the shoes of the bestest, most badass super soldier ever invented. The progression it allows for gives the linear levels a sense of direction and pacing, and lends the overall campaign a sense of purpose, like it's all going somewhere rather than just you tramping about shooting aliens until it ends. And while the characterization and themes here are certainly pretty basic and deliberately understated, they still work to instill each game with personality and tone. Cortana and the Chief's slow realization of the true nature of the Halo ring in Combat Evolved, the Arbiter's unwavering allegiance to the Covenant and their religious beliefs being repeatedly called into question until he and the elites finally take a noble stand against their former allies in Halo 2, Buck's complicated past with the mysterious Dare and his soldiers' growing mistrust of the secretive higher-ups, and by extension her in Halo 3 ODST, the growing desperation of the battle for the planet as Noble Team goes down one by one in Halo Reach. All of this is very small, has basically no effect on gameplay whatsoever, and is far from ever present, but the inclusion of these little writing flourishes and details breathe life into the game's world, making it more than just a shooting gallery. What's especially telling, however, is the popular reaction to Halo 3's relationship between Cortana, the Gravemind, and the Master Chief. This would just be more of the minimal basic storytelling that the rest of the franchise did, except that they let it invade the gameplay and level design. All it did was occasionally hijack the player's vision with hallucinations of either Cortana or the Gravemind reciting some meaningful poetry and slowing the player's movement speed to a crawl for a brief moment. These would rarely occur during combat, never took too long, and had specific places in the level where they would activate. And the player base fucking hated them. Seriously, ask anyone what their favorite level in Halo 3 is, and you will get an answer for every level except the one where the hallucinations are the most common. And I don't blame you guys, these hallucinations suck. They slam the brakes on the delightful forward momentum that Halo levels have, and unlike the cutscenes, you can't skip them, making replaying the game more of a chore than it needed to be. This is what happens when you prioritize story over gameplay in a game that isn't built around being a mix of the two. In other words, this is the entirety of The Last of Us, except The Last of Us's focus on gameplay is downplayed and the focus on story is so apparent that nobody really cares. A good rule of thumb might be that if I want to sit down with a friend, hand them a controller, and have fun showing them the delightful gameplay of your video game, is the story going to A, be a part of that fun, B, not get in the way of that fun, or C, interfere with that fun? Answer A would be that rare and fantastic kind of game that blends story and gameplay perfectly, like Undertale. B would be most of the Bungie Halo games, and C would be The Last of Us. Not that I would sit a friend down to show them how The Last of Us plays, because it doesn't really play that well anyway. Listen guys, I know I was pretty mean to The Last of Us in this video, but I want you to understand that I really love it. It's one of my favorite games exclusively because of the story I get to immerse myself in when I sit down to play, and that's exactly why I'm so extremely excited about The Last of Us Part 2. Seriously, if that game isn't on the PS4, I'm just going to watch it online because I want to experience the story that badly, regardless of whether or not I get to play it. I need access to that narrative because it continues the story of one of my favorite characters in history, and that story is already showing a lot of promise. I don't know what other proof I need to convince you that as a narrative experience, The Last of Us is perfect, an unprecedented masterpiece, but Halo is the better game. And that's all I really wanted to say.
I need to find a new idea. All my old ones are kind of dead. Another place where I could meet some new friends.